New York City was buzzing with the rhythm of a Friday night. The streets of Manhattan were filled with people hurrying home after a long week or to parties to celebrate the beginning of the weekend. But none of them had any idea that this night would change the life of one of the city's most influential businessmen forever. William Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Investments, stood on the balcony of his apartment, contemplating the city at his feet. At the age of 53, he had achieved everything he could dream of: a multi-million-dollar company, a luxurious home, and expensive cars. But for some reason that evening, it all seemed empty and meaningless. "Will, are you hiding from your guests again?" His wife, Elizabeth's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. William turned around and saw her slender figure in the balcony doorway. Elizabeth was half his age, and sometimes he wondered if she really loved him or just appreciated the comfortable life he provided her. "I'm sorry, darling. I just needed some air," he said, trying to smile. Elizabeth came closer, wrapped her arms around his neck. "Come on, don't be so glum. It's your party. Everyone is waiting for you downstairs." William nodded and allowed his wife to lead him back to the living room, where the entire business elite of New York had gathered. The party was in honor of the 25th anniversary of his company's founding, but William felt only tired and anxious for it to be over. The next few hours passed in a blur. William smiled mechanically, shook hands, accepted congratulations. But his thoughts were far away. He remembered his first steps in business, when everything was simple and clear, when money had not yet become the only measure of success. When the last guest finally left, it was well after midnight. Elizabeth, tired but happy, kissed William on the cheek. "I'm going to bed, dear. Are you coming?" "A little later," he replied. "I want to walk around a bit more, clear my head." Elizabeth rolled her eyes. "You're going out at night again? All right, but don't be long." William went down to the street and walked without a specific goal. The city at night seemed different, quieter, calmer. He walked, not paying attention to the direction, immersed in his thoughts. Suddenly, two men jumped out of a dark alley. "Wallet and watch, quick!" one of them growled, flashing a knife blade. William froze. All his life he had been used to being in control of the situation, but now he felt completely defenseless. "Look, I don't want any trouble," he began, trying to calm the attackers down. "Shut up and give me your valuables." The second robber interrupted him and pushed William. William lost his balance and hit his head on the wall of the house. His vision swam. He felt a sharp pain, and then everything went dark. When William came to, it was already daylight. He was lying on a bench in a park, his head aching unbearably. He tried to get up and realized that he could not remember how he got there. Moreover, he couldn't remember who he was. William looked around, trying to figure out where he was. The park was unfamiliar to him. He checked his pockets, empty. No wallet, no phone, no ID. "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" An elderly man walking his dog approached him. William looked at him in confusion. "I don't know. I can't remember how I got here." The man looked at him carefully. "You look torn up." "No, no, 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 no," William answered quickly, not knowing why. I need to remember." The man shrugged and walked on, and William remained sitting on the bench, trying to piece together the fragments of his memories. But there was only emptiness in his head. The following days merged into one long nightmare. William wandered the streets, trying to find something familiar that could help him remember his past. But the city remained alien and hostile. He slept on benches in parks and ate what he could find in garbage cans. People avoided him, looking at him as just another homeless person. And William still could not believe that this was happening to him. On the fifth day, he stood at the window of an electronics store, looking at the TV screens, and suddenly he saw his face on all the screens. "The search continues for missing businessman William Harrison," the news anchor said. The CEO of Harrison Investments disappeared 5 days ago after a party at his home. Police are looking at all possible leads, including kidnapping. William looked at his photo on the screen and couldn't believe his eyes. It was him, but at the same time it was someone else. A clean-shaven man in an expensive suit with the confident look of a successful man. "Is it me?" he whispered, touching his overgrown face. But why can't he remember anything? And what should he do now? At that moment, someone roughly pushed him. "Hey, tramp, don't block the window. If you want to watch TV, buy some." William walked away, still stunned by what he had seen. He was a successful businessman. He had everything. And now he is homeless, without money or documents, and without even a memory of his past. What happened that night? Why can't he remember anything? And most importantly, how can he get back to his old life if he can't even remember what it was like? With these thoughts in mind, William walked down the street, lost in the crowd, another invisible man in the big city that once lay at his feet. It's been a week since William Harrison, the former CEO of Harrison Investments, found himself on the streets of New York City without memory, money, or identification. Today he woke up under the bridge in Central Park where he found help last night. William slowly got up, feeling every muscle in his body ache. He looked at his hands, once well-groomed with manicures. Now they were dirty, with cracked skin. His expensive suit had turned into rags and thick stubble had grown on his face. "Good morning, John Doe," a hoarse voice said next to him. William turned around and saw an old man who was also sleeping under the bridge. It was Frank, a homeless veteran whom William had met a few days ago. "Hello, Frank," William said. John Doe was what Frank called him because William couldn't remember his real name. "How did you sleep at our 5-star resort?" Frank smiled, showing his sparse teeth. William tried to smile back, but only made a grimace. "As always, it's great, especially when the rats decided to have a marathon on my legs in the middle of the night." Frank laughed. "Welcome to the real world, buddy. There's no place for wimps here." William nodded. During that week, he realized how brutal life on the streets could be. Every day was a struggle to survive, to find food, a safe place to sleep, to avoid trouble with the police and other homeless people. "Let's go," Frank said, standing up. "It's Thursday, which means they're giving away free soup at St. Patrick's Church. If we hurry, we can make it to breakfast." They set off across the park. William still couldn't get used to the way people looked at him with disgust, fear, or, at best, pity. He tried not to make eye contact with anyone, afraid to see in the eyes of passers-by a reflection of what he had become. A crowd of homeless people had already gathered near the church. William and Frank stood in line, holding the plastic bowls that Frank always carried with him. "Thank you," William mumbled as a volunteer poured him some hot soup. They sat down on the steps of the church, greedily devouring the food. For William, this simple soup seemed like the most delicious meal in the world. "You know, John," Frank said between mouthfuls, "you don't look like an ordinary tramp. I can tell you're made of a different stuff. What happened to you?" William sighed. "I wish I knew, Frank. I woke up a week ago on a park bench and I can't remember anything about my past. No name, no address, nothing." Frank whistled. "Oh, shit. Amnesia? Like in the movies? I never thought it could happen in real life." "Neither did I," William smiled bitterly. "But here I am, and this is my reality." Suddenly, a young woman stopped next to them. She was dressed in simple but neat clothes and held a stack of leaflets. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted with a warm smile. "My name is Rebecca, and I'm from the New Start charity organization. We help people who find themselves in a difficult life situation. Perhaps you need help?" Frank waved his hand. "Thank you, beautiful, but I'm too old for New Starts. But my friend John might need your help." Rebecca turned to William. "Is that so? Would you like to get help?" William hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no. His pride still prevented him from accepting that he needed help. But the other part of him realized that this could be his chance to get off the street and maybe remember his past. "Yes," he finally answered. I need help." Rebecca smiled. "Great. Our center is 2 blocks away. There you can get a bath, some clean clothes, and talk to our social worker. They will help you find temporary housing and a job." William thanked her and took the card with the address of the center. When Rebecca left, Frank patted him on the shoulder. "Well done, boy. Don't waste this chance. You deserve a better life." William nodded, feeling hope emerge in his heart. An hour later, he stood in front of the door of the New Start Center. The building looked old but well-maintained. Brightly colored curtains hung on the windows and flower pots stood at the entrance. William took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside, he was greeted by a friendly middle-aged woman. "Welcome to New Start. How can I help you?" Rebecca sent me here," William answered uncertainly. "Oh, you must be John. Rebecca called and told me about you. My name is Martha. I'm a social worker. Let's get you cleaned up first and then we'll talk." The next few hours flew by in a blur. William took a shower, his first in a week, and it felt like real bliss. He was given clean clothes, simple but clean and intact. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized his reflection. "Well, now you look like a new man," Martha said when William returned to her office. "Tell me your story." William told her everything he could remember. How he woke up in the park with no memory. How he spent the week on the street. Martha listened intently, taking notes. "You know, John," she said when William finished, "your situation is unusual but not hopeless. We will help you get temporary documents and find a job. In the meantime, you can stay in our shelter." William felt tears coming to his eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." Martha smiled softly. "Just use this chance to start a new life. Even if you can't remember your past, you can still create a better future." That night, lying on a clean bed in the shelter, William could not sleep for a long time. His mind was filled with thoughts of a past he couldn't remember and a future that seemed so uncertain. He remembered his picture in the news, a successful businessman in an expensive suit. Who was that man? And would he ever be able to return to that life? But even if he couldn't, William thought as he fell asleep, maybe this was his chance to start over, to create a new identity, a new life. And maybe this life would be even better than the one he had forgotten. 2 weeks have passed since the day when the man everyone called John crossed the threshold of the New Start Center. During this time, his life began to slowly get better, although the memories of the past still did not return. This morning, John woke up early. He got up quietly, trying not to wake the other residents of the shelter, and went outside. Fresh air filled his lungs, and he took a deep breath, enjoying the peace of the early morning. "Good morning, John," Rebecca greeted him as she opened the door to the center. "You're here early." "Good morning," John replied with a slight smile. "Yes, I couldn't sleep for some reason." Rebecca nodded in understanding. "You know, that's normal. Many of our clients have trouble sleeping at first, but it gets better over time." John thanked her and went to his new job. Thanks to the help of the New Start Center, he got a job as an assistant in a small bookstore nearby. The job was simple: shelving books, helping customers, and sometimes working at the cash register. But John was grateful for the opportunity. When he entered the bookstore, the owner, an elderly woman named Margaret, was already there. "Good morning, John," she greeted him. "You're here early." "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," John replied. "Yes, I decided to come in early and do some work with the new arrival." Margaret nodded in approval. "That's great. I've always said there's something special about you, John. You don't look like an ordinary homeless person." John tensed. He hadn't told Margaret about his amnesia, just that he was in a difficult situation. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," he said cautiously. I'm just trying to do my job the best I can." He went to work unpacking boxes of new books and putting them on the shelves. Suddenly, his gaze rested on one of the books. It was an economics book, and something about it seemed familiar. John picked up the book and began to flip through the pages. The words and terms he read seemed strangely familiar. He understood complex economic concepts as if he had always known them. "What does this mean?" John thought. "Did I have something to do with economics in my past life?" He was so deep in thought that he didn't notice Margaret approaching him. "John?" she called. "Are you all right?" John flinched. "Yes, I'm sorry, This book seemed interesting." Margaret looked at the title and raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Macroeconomics in a global context? I didn't know you were interested in such complex topics." John shrugged, trying to look casual. "I just decided to broaden my horizons." Margaret smiled. "That's commendable. You know what? You can have this book for yourself. Consider it a bonus to your salary." John thanked her and put the book in his bag. All day long he couldn't wait until his shift was over so he could go back to the shelter and study the book more closely. In the evening, sitting on his bed in the shelter, John immersed himself in reading. He was amazed at how easily he understood the complex economic concepts. It was as if he had always known this information. He just forgot about it. "What are you reading, John?" asked his roommate, a man named Peter. John showed him the cover of the book. "Wow," Peter whistled. "This looks complicated. Do you understand any of this?" "It's weird, but yeah," John replied. It's like I've known it all before." Peter looked at him carefully. "You know, John, maybe you were some kind of cool economist or businessman in your past life. That would explain why you are so different." John thought about it. The thought had crossed his mind before, but he was afraid to believe it. What if his past life had been much better than the one he had now? Could he accept that? The next day, on his way to work, John noticed a billboard on the street. It was advertising some investment company. Again, something seemed familiar to him. He stopped, looking at the advertisement. Suddenly, his eyes landed on the company's logo. It was a stylized dollar sign with an H inside. John felt his heart start to beat faster. This logo, he was sure he had seen it before, but where? He took out his phone, the simple one he had been given at the New Start Center, and Googled the name of the company, Harrison Investments. The search results showed that it was a large investment company, one of the largest in the country. John began to read about the company's history and activities, and again felt a strange sense of familiarity. "Did I really work for this company?" he thought. "Or maybe I had some business with it." John sat on the bench for a long time, trying to understand why this company evoked such strong emotions in him. Eventually, he got up and went to work. All day he worked mechanically, his mind far away. He was trying to reconcile what he had learned about Harrison Investments with the snippets of knowledge that suddenly appeared in his head. In the evening, when he returned to the shelter, John could not sleep for a long time. He thought about his past life, about his possible connection to this company, but most of all, he wondered why he was on the street. What happened the night he lost his memory? And why couldn't he still remember anything? John decided that he would not tell anyone about his suspicions for now. He was afraid that if they found out, he would be forced to return to a life he did not remember or understand. Instead, he decided to try to learn more about Harrison Investments and the world of finance in general. Perhaps if he learns enough, the memories will start to return. With these thoughts in mind, John finally fell asleep, but his dreams were restless. He dreamed of tall office buildings, people in expensive suits, numbers on computer screens, and through it all, he had the feeling that he had forgotten something important, something he had to do. When John woke up in the morning, he felt that he was on the threshold of something important. He didn't know where this discovery would lead him, but he was ready to face his past, whatever it was. A month had passed since John first noticed the Harrison Investments advertisement. During this time, he diligently studied everything he could find about the world of finance and investment. He spent every free minute in the public library reading books on economics and finance, and was amazed at how easily he could absorb complex material. That morning, John came to work at the bookstore earlier than usual. He was in the middle of shelving new arrivals when he heard the front doorbell ring. "Good morning. How can I help you?" he automatically asked, turning to the front door. An elegant middle-aged woman stood in front of him. Her expensive suit and confident posture immediately distinguished her from the usual visitors to the bookstore. "Good morning," the woman said with a slight smile. "I'm looking for a book about the history of Wall Street. Can you help me?" John nodded and led her to the appropriate section. While he was looking for the right book, the woman watched him carefully. "You're well versed in economic literature," she said. John shrugged his shoulders. "I've just been reading a lot about it lately." "Really?" The woman seemed interested. "And what interests you the most?" "Investments, macroeconomics, financial markets," John replied, surprised at his own knowledge. The woman smiled. "You know, I have a proposition for you. I'm Elizabeth Carter, the executive director of the New Life Charitable Foundation. We help people in difficult life situations find jobs that match their skills and interests. I see that you have potential. How would you like to try yourself as an assistant analyst at our foundation?" John was impressed. It was exactly what he had dreamed of. A chance to dive into the world of finance, maybe find a key to his past. That would be great," he said, trying to hide his excitement. "But I don't have the right education or experience." Elizabeth waved her hand. "Don't worry about it. We provide on-the-job training. What matters is your interest and ability. Here's my business card. Come by tomorrow at 10 a.m. for an interview." John thanked me and took the business card. All day he could not think of anything else. In the evening he told Rebecca from the New Start Center about the offer. "This is a great opportunity, John," Rebecca was excited. "But be careful. Not all charities are as honest as they seem." John nodded, grateful for the advice. The next day he came to the interview, nervous but determined. The office of the New Life Foundation impressed him with its luxury. Elizabeth greeted him with a friendly smile and showed him to her office. "Tell me about yourself, John," she asked as they sat down. John hesitated. He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't tell the whole truth either. "I found myself in a difficult situation a few months ago," he began cautiously. "I lost my job, my house, but now I'm trying to get back to normal. I am very interested in finance and economics and would like to work in this field." Elizabeth listened attentively, nodding. "You know, John," she said after a pause, "I see a lot of potential in you. We are ready to give you a chance. You'll start as an assistant analyst, but if you show good results, you can quickly move up the ladder." John couldn't believe his luck. The very next day, he started working. The first weeks were stressful, but exciting. John eagerly absorbed new information, often staying in the office late. His colleagues were impressed with his abilities and knowledge. "Are you sure you haven't worked in finance before?" they would often joke. John just smiled back, not knowing what to say. Elizabeth often came into their department to watch John work. She always praised his progress and seemed genuinely interested in his development. One evening, when John stayed late in the office, Elizabeth invited him to her office. "I'm very pleased with your work, John," she said, pouring them both a whiskey. "You have a real talent for finance." John thanked her, feeling proud of his accomplishments. "You know," Elizabeth continued, "I think you're ready for more. I have a special project I'd like you to be a part of." She talked about an investment strategy that she said could bring huge returns for the foundation. "It would help us help even more people," she explained. But this strategy, let's just say it's on the edge of the law. We need someone who can work discreetly and not ask too many questions. I think you're perfect for the role." John felt his breath catch in his throat. On the one hand, he was grateful to Elizabeth for the trust and opportunity she had given him. On the other hand, the offer didn't seem right. "I'm not sure it's a good idea," he said cautiously. Elizabeth leaned closer, her eyes sparkling. "John, think of all the people we could help. Sometimes you have to bend some rules for the greater good. Besides," her voice grew quieter, "you don't have a choice, do you? You don't want to go back out on the street, do you?" John felt a chill run down his spine. He suddenly realized he was trapped. Elizabeth knew more about his past than she was saying, and now she was using it against him. "I need time to think," he said, trying to remain calm. Elizabeth nodded. "Of course. But don't delay your decision. And remember, John," her voice became hard, "you're part of our family now, and a family should stick together, right?" John left the office feeling like the ground was slipping away from under his feet. He thought he had found a new life, a new purpose. Instead, he found himself trapped in a trap of his own making. The next few days turned into a living hell. John tried to work as usual, but he constantly felt Elizabeth's watchful eyes on him. He realized that she was waiting for his answer, and every day of delay made the situation more and more tense. At night, he barely slept, thinking about his situation. He could agree to Elizabeth's offer and become an accomplice to illegal activities, or he could refuse and risk everything he had gained in recent months. One evening, as John was sitting in his room at the shelter, Peter approached him. "What's wrong, buddy?" he asked, noticing John's worried look. "You haven't been yourself lately." John hesitated. He couldn't tell the whole truth, but he felt he needed advice. "Peter," he began cautiously, "what would you do if you were offered a job that could change your life for the better, but it wasn't exactly legal?" Peter whistled. "Wow, man, that sounds serious. You know, I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, and believe me, no opportunity is worth losing your freedom or self-respect." John nodded, grateful for the advice. He made his decision. The next day he came to the office earlier than usual. Elizabeth was already there, as if waiting for him. "Well, John," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, "have you made a decision?" John took a deep breath. "Yes, I have. I can't take part in your project. I'm resigning." The smile disappeared from Elizabeth's face. "Do you realize what you're doing? You're throwing away everything we've given you? You'll go back to the street?" "If I have to," John answered firmly. "But I will not participate in illegal activities." Elizabeth stood up, her eyes blazing with anger. "You're going to regret this, John. Do you think you can just walk away? I have connections. I can make sure you don't get hired anywhere." John felt fear clench his heart, but he didn't back down. "Maybe, but I'd rather be an honest homeless man than a corrupt crook." With those words, he walked out of the office, leaving an angry Elizabeth behind. Back at the shelter, John felt a mixture of relief and fear. He was back at the beginning of his journey with no job and no prospects, but at the same time he felt proud that he had made the right choice. When Rebecca learned of his decision, she supported him. "You did the right thing, John. Not all opportunities are worth taking. We'll find you another job, I'm sure." John thanked her, feeling grateful for her support. He didn't know what the future held, but he was sure he had made the right choice. That night, lying in bed, John thought about his past, which was still a mystery to him. He may have missed the opportunity to learn more about it while working in the financial sector, but he had kept his integrity and dignity. And that, he decided, was far more important than any memories or material possessions. 2 weeks passed after John left his job at the New Life Foundation. These days were filled with uncertainty and anxiety. John went back to work at the bookstore, grateful to Mrs. Thompson for taking him back. One morning, as he was shelving books, John came across a new issue of a financial magazine. On the cover was a photo of a man John recognized immediately. It was the CEO of Harrison Investments. Robert Clark, How I Saved Harrison Investments After William Harrison Disappeared, read the headline. John froze, staring at the photo. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his head, and a picture flashed before his eyes. He was sitting in a luxurious office across from this man, Robert Clark, and they were arguing about something. "John, are you all right?" Mrs. Thompson's voice snapped him out of his reverie. Yes, John mumbled, trying to compose himself. I have a headache." Mrs. Thompson looked at him with concern. "Maybe you should take a day off. You've been working a lot lately." John thanked her, but refused. He couldn't afford to miss a single day of work, especially now that his financial situation was once again precarious. All day long, John couldn't get the vision out of his head. It was so real, so familiar. Was it a memory from his past life? And if so, what did it have to do with Harrison Investments? In the evening, when he returned to the shelter, John decided to share his experiences with Rebecca. "Rebecca," he began hesitantly, "do you think it's possible for a person to suddenly start remembering their past after a long period of amnesia?" Rebecca looked at him carefully. "It is quite possible, John. Often a trigger sound, smell, image can bring back memories." John told her about his vision in the bookstore. "That's very interesting," Rebecca said after a pause. "Maybe your past is somehow connected to this company. Have you tried contacting them?" John shook his head. "I'm afraid. What if my past isn't what I think it is? What if I was a bad person?" Rebecca gently put her hand on his shoulder. "John, no matter what you were in the past, you are a good person now. You've proven that by your actions. But if you want to find out the truth about yourself, maybe it's worth the risk." John thanked her for her advice and went to his room, deep in thought. The next day, when he came to work, John felt that someone was watching him. He looked around and saw a middle-aged man in an expensive suit looking at him closely. "Can I help you?" John asked, approaching the stranger. The man looked at him intently. "Excuse me, but you look a lot like an old friend of mine. Is your name William by any chance?" John felt his heart begin to beat furiously. "No, my name is John. But I don't remember my past. I have amnesia." The man's eyes widened in surprise. "My God, it's really you, William. I'm Michael Burns, your former CFO at Harrison Investments. We've been looking all over for you." John, or was it William, felt his legs give out. He grabbed the nearest shelf to keep from falling. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Are you saying that I am William Harrison, the missing CEO?" Michael nodded, his face a mixture of joy and concern. "Yes, that's you. My God, what happened to you? How did you end up here?" John shook his head. "I don't know. I woke up a few months ago with no memories. I couldn't remember who I was or where I came from." Michael took his hand. "You need to come with me immediately. Your wife, your company, everyone has been looking for you. We thought something terrible had happened to you." John felt panic grip him. Wife? Company? That was too much information at once. "I can't just leave," he said, trying to gather his thoughts. "I need to talk to the bookstore owner, to the people at the shelter." Michael nodded in understanding. "Of course, I understand. But please, let me help you. Here is my business card. Call me when you're ready. We can meet and I'll tell you everything." John took the card with trembling hands. When Michael left, he sank into a chair, feeling his world turn upside down. The next few days passed in a blur. John told Mrs. Thompson and Rebecca about his meeting with Michael. They were both shocked, but supportive. "John, or rather William," Mrs. Thompson said, "you have to find out the truth about yourself. But know that no matter who you were before, to me, you will always be the honest and hard-working young man I know." Rebecca agreed. "You have the right to know your past." But remember that your future is what you create, regardless of your past. Finally, a week after the meeting with Michael, John got up the courage to call him. They agreed to meet at a small cafe near the bookstore. When John arrived, Michael was already waiting for him. He looked tense, but happy. "William," he began as John sat down at the table, "I still can't believe it's really you. We were all desperate when you disappeared." John smiled nervously. "Please, call me John. I'm still not used to the name William." Michael nodded. "Of course, whatever you like. Tell me, what do you remember?" John told him everything, how he woke up with no memory, how he lived on the streets, how he gradually tried to rebuild his life. Michael listened without interrupting, his face a mixture of shock and sympathy. "My God, Will John," he said when John finished. "I couldn't imagine what you've been through, but it's going to be okay now. We're going to help you get your life back on track." John hesitated. "But I'm not sure I want to go back. I don't remember that life. I don't remember who I was. What if I was a bad person?" Michael shook his head. "You weren't a bad person, John. You were a demanding boss, yes, but a fair one. You always cared about your employees and the ethics of our business. When you disappeared, the whole company was in shock." John felt a warmth spread through his chest. Maybe his past life wasn't so bad after all. "What about my family?" he asked hesitantly. Michael's face darkened. "Your wife, Elizabeth, was devastated by your disappearance. She is still waiting for you." John felt a stab of guilt. Somewhere out there was a woman who loved him and he didn't even remember her face. "What am I going to do now?" he asked in confusion. Michael gently put his hand on his shoulder. "That's up to you, John. But know that you are not alone. Your family, your friends, your company, we are all here to support you. If you decide to come back, we will help you rebuild your life step by step." John nodded, feeling fear and hope struggle in his heart. "I need time to think," he said at last. "This is too much information at once." Michael nodded in understanding. "Of course I understand. Here's my card. Give me a call when you're ready. And remember, John, you're not alone." When John returned to the shelter that evening, his head was spinning with all the new information. He had a family, friends, a successful company, a whole life he didn't remember. And now he had to decide whether he wanted to go back to that life or continue the new one he had begun to build. Lying in bed that night, John couldn't sleep for a long time. He thought about his past and future, about the choices he would have to make. And for the first time in a long time, he felt not fear of the unknown, but hope for a better future, whatever it might be. An autumn evening enveloped the city in chill, and John decided to take a longer walk home through the park. The rustling of fallen leaves under his feet was soothing, helping him to organize his thoughts after a busy day at the bookstore. Suddenly, a lone figure on a bench caught his eye. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit was feeding pigeons, and something about the scene seemed incredibly familiar to John. He slowed his pace, taking a closer look. The man looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment there was silence, filled with the tension of recognition. "William?" the man finally said, his eyes widening in shock. "Oh my God, is it really you?" John felt his heart begin to race. He knew this man, although he couldn't remember his name. "Yes, I guess it is me," John answered uncertainly. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember you." The man slowly rose, still not believing his eyes. "William, it's me, George Summers. We worked together at Harrison Investments. I was your deputy." At that moment, John felt a sharp pain in his temples, and vivid images flashed before his eyes. A spacious office with panoramic windows, long meetings at the oval table, lively discussions at the coffee machine. "George," he repeated, and the name felt right on his tongue. "I don't know what to say. I have amnesia. I don't remember almost anything from my past." George came closer, his face a mixture of shock and sympathy. "Oh my God, William! We all thought something terrible had happened to you. You just disappeared without a trace. What happened?" John sighed and slowly sank down on the bench. George sat down next to him. For the next half hour, John told his story about waking up with no memory, about living on the streets, about working in a bookstore. George listened without interrupting, his face expressing more and more amazement. "Unbelievable," he said when John finished. "You've always been a strong man, William, but this is just amazing." John shook his head. "I don't feel strong. I feel lost. I don't know who I am." George looked at him thoughtfully. "Perhaps I can help you remember. I have something that might jog your memory." He took his phone out of his pocket and started looking for something. Then he handed the phone to John. "Here, take a look. This is a video from our last company party, a week before you disappeared." John took the phone with trembling hands. He saw himself on the screen, an elegantly dressed, confident man speaking to a large audience. He was talking about the future of the company, about innovation and responsibility to customers. Suddenly, a wave of memories hit John. He remembered the smell of the expensive cologne, the feel of the microphone in his hand, the warmth of the spotlights on his face. He remembered the faces of the people in the room, his colleagues, partners, friends. "I remember this," he whispered, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. "I remember that night." George put his hand on his shoulder. "That's wonderful, William. You see, your memory is coming back. Maybe you just need more triggers like that." John nodded, feeling hope well up in his heart. "What else can you tell me?" he asked eagerly. "About my work? About my life?" The next few hours flew by in a flash. George talked about their work at Harrison Investments, the projects they had implemented, the difficult decisions they had to make. With each story, John felt fragments of his past coming back to him. What about my family?" he finally decided to ask. George's face grew serious. "Your wife, Elizabeth, was devastated by your disappearance. She is still waiting for you. And your daughter, Emily—" "I have a daughter?" John interrupted, feeling his heart clench. George nodded. "Yes, Emily. She's 5 years old now. She misses you very much, William." John felt a pang of guilt and longing wash over him. He had a family that loved him and was waiting for him, and he didn't even remember them. "I have to go back," he said firmly. "I have to try to rebuild my life." George smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. We will all be glad to have you back. But don't rush it. You need time to process and prepare." They exchanged contacts, and George promised to help with arranging a reunion with his family and his return to the company. Returning to the shelter that evening, John felt like his life was once again on the verge of big changes. But this time, he did not feel fear. Instead, he felt determined and hopeful. At the shelter, John told George Rebezi about his meeting with George. She listened carefully and smiled. "John, I am so happy for you. This is a huge step. But remember that you must not rush. Take as much time as you need." John thanked her, feeling deeply grateful for all the support he had received in this place. The next few days flew by in a blur. John continued to work at the bookstore, but now he devoted every free minute to preparing to return to his old life. He read financial news, studied the history of his company, and tried to remember as many details of his past as possible. Every evening he talked to George on the phone, asking a lot of questions and gradually putting together a picture of his past life. Every day he felt his confidence growing. Finally, a week after their meeting in the park, George told him that he had organized a meeting with Elizabeth and Emily. It was to take place the next day in a quiet cafe near the city center. That night, John barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine how the meeting would go. He was afraid that he would not be able to be the husband and father they remembered. but at the same time, he felt impatient and hopeful. When the morning came, John felt strangely calm. He put on his best clothes, the shirt and pants he had been given at the New Start Center, and headed to the meeting that was to change his life. As he approached the cafe, John stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Then, summoning all his courage, he opened the door and stepped inside, ready to face his past and possibly his future. He knew that the road to fully restoring his life would be long and difficult, but now he was ready to take the first step on that path. John, now William again, stood in front of the mirror in his former home, looking at his reflection. The expensive suit fit him like a glove, but he still felt strange in this image of a successful businessman. 2 weeks had passed since his emotional encounter with Elizabeth and Emily in the cafe. Those days were filled with tears, hugs, and long conversations. Gradually, William began to feel connected to his family, although many memories were still fuzzy. "Honey, are you ready?" Elizabeth's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. William turned around and saw his wife standing in the bedroom doorway. She looked elegant in her business suit, but her eyes still showed concern. "Yeah, almost," he replied, trying to smile. It all seems so unreal." Elizabeth came over and gently took his hand. "I know it's not easy, but we are together, and we will get through this. You are not alone." William nodded, feeling grateful for her support. Today was an important day. He was returning to the Harrison Investments office for the first time since his disappearance. When they arrived at the tall building in the center of the city, William felt his heart begin to beat faster. George Summers met them at the entrance. "William, it's good to see you back in action," he greeted with a warm smile. They went up to the top floor where the CEO's office was located. When the elevator doors opened, William was greeted by applause and cheers from his employees. He tried to smile, although he felt a little embarrassed by the attention. In his office, William sat down at his large oak desk and took a deep breath. He was home, but for some reason he felt like a stranger. "Where do I begin?" he asked George, who had stayed with him. "I've prepared a brief report for you on the state of affairs in the company," George replied, handing him a folder. "But there is something else we need to talk about." William raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" George sighed. "Your disappearance. We've done an internal investigation, and there are some disturbing details." William straightened up in his chair, feeling the tension building. "Tell me everything." George told him about the strange financial transactions that had taken place a few days before William's disappearance. Large sums of money were transferred to offshore accounts and then quickly transferred back. "We suspect that someone was trying to pull off a large-scale scam," George finished. "And your disappearance could be connected to it." William felt himself filled with anger and determination. "We have to find out the truth. Whoever is behind this, they will pay for what they did to my life." William spent the next few days immersed in financial reports and documents. He worked late trying to find clues. Elizabeth worried about his health, but understood his need to find answers. One evening, as William was sorting through old files, he came across a strange document. It was a draft agreement with a company he had never heard of, but something in the document seemed familiar. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his head and a scene flashed before his eyes. He was sitting in a dark bar with a man whose face remained in the shadows. The man hands him an envelope and says, "This will destroy them, but be careful. They are dangerous." William staggered back, grabbing the table. This memory was the key to everything, he was sure of it. The next day he shared his discovery with George and Elizabeth. "We have to find this man," William said determinedly. "He knows what happened to me that night." George nodded. "I'll get in touch with our contacts at the police station. Maybe they can help." Elizabeth took William's hand. "Be careful, dear. I just got you back and I don't want to lose you again." William hugged her. "Don't worry, I'll be careful. But I need to know the truth." The investigation was gaining momentum. William and George worked together, trying to unravel a complex web of financial transactions and corporate intrigue. Gradually, the picture began to emerge. It seemed that a group of high-ranking Harrison Investments employees were involved in a large-scale money laundering scheme. William had apparently stumbled upon evidence of their activities, and they decided to get rid of him. But many questions still remained unanswered. Who was the man in the bar? How exactly did William lose his memory? And most importantly, who was behind it all? One evening, when William was returning home late from the office, he noticed a black car following him. His heart began to beat faster as he remembered Elizabeth's warning of danger. He sped up his pace, but the car also sped up. Suddenly, it stopped next to William, and a man in a dark suit got out. "Mr. Harrison," the man said quietly, "I think we need to talk." William froze, feeling the adrenaline pulsing through his veins. He knew that this moment could be the key to solving the mystery of his disappearance, but he also realized that it could be very dangerous. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to remain calm. The man smiled, but the smile did not touch his eyes. "Let's just say I represent people who have a very strong interest in your silence." William felt his hands clench into fists. "You mean the people who tried to kill me?" The man shrugged. "It was an unfortunate accident. We just wanted you to forget some things. And it worked, didn't it?" William took a step forward, feeling anger overwhelm him. "You ruined my life. I lost months. I lost the memories of my family. And you think I'm just going to forget about it?" The man sighed. "Mr. Harrison, you are a smart man. You must realize that some secrets are best left buried, for your own safety and the safety of your family." It was a clear threat, and William felt a chill run down his spine. But he was not about to give up. "I will find the truth," he said firmly, "and when I do, you will all be held accountable for your crimes." The man shook his head. "I'm sorry you think so. I hope you will change your mind before it is too late." With that, he got back in his car and drove off, leaving William standing on the sidewalk, overwhelmed with emotion and determination. William knew he couldn't stop. He had to find the truth, not only for his own sake, but also for the sake of his family and all those who might have been affected by this corrupt scheme. When he returned home, he hugged Elizabeth and Emily tightly, feeling his resolve only strengthen. He knew he had a tough fight ahead of him, but he was ready for it. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it no matter what. William woke up to the sound of his alarm at 5 in the morning. He got up quietly, trying not to wake Elizabeth. It was still dark when he went down to the kitchen and made himself a strong cup of coffee. Sitting at the table, he scanned the latest news on his tablet, looking for any information that might be related to his case. At 6, Elizabeth came downstairs, already dressed for work. "Didn't sleep again?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. William sighed. "I slept, but not much. Too many thoughts." Elizabeth sat down next to him and took his hand. "Well, maybe we should go to the police. What am I going to tell them? That I suspect my colleagues of corruption but have no proof?" He shook his head. "No, I need something concrete." At 7, William was already in his office. He started the day by reviewing the financial reports, looking for any inconsistencies. Around 10, George came in to see him. "How's it going?" he asked quietly, closing the door behind him. "Slowly," William replied. "But I found something interesting. Look at these transactions from the last quarter." They leaned over the documents, discussing suspicious transfers. Suddenly, the door opened and Robert Clark, the current CEO, entered the room. "Oh, William George, good to see you at work," he said with a tight smile. "What are you working on?" "Just reviewing the quarterly reports," William replied, trying to sound casual. "I want to keep up to date with everything since I've been away." Robert nodded. Of course. Don't forget about the board meeting at 2 o'clock. After he left, William and George exchanged glances. He suspects something, George whispered. Perhaps, William replied. We need to be more careful. In the afternoon, William attended a board meeting. He listened carefully to the reports, trying to catch any hints of illegal activity. But everyone seemed too professional, too cautious. Returning to his office, William continued his work. Around 6 p.m., when most of the staff had already gone home, he decided to take a chance. He quietly went to the archive using his access card. In the semi-darkened room, William quickly browsed through the folders looking for documents from the period before he disappeared. Suddenly, he heard footsteps in the hallway. His heart beat faster as he turned off the flashlight and hid behind a closet. The door opened and a guard entered. He looked around the room with his flashlight and left without noticing anything suspicious. William breathed a sigh of relief. He quickly took photos of several documents on his phone and left the archive. Returning home late at night, William felt a mixture of adrenaline and anxiety. He knew that he had taken the first real step toward uncovering the truth, but he also realized that he was now taking even more risks. At home, Elizabeth was waiting for him with dinner. "How was your day?" she asked as they sat down to dinner. "Fine," William answered, trying to sound calm. "A lot of work, trying to catch up." Later, lying in bed, William could not sleep for a long time. He thought about the documents he had photographed, the risks he was taking, his family. He knew that the path to the truth would be long and dangerous, but he was ready to go all the way. As he fell asleep, William decided that tomorrow he would contact his old friend, a former detective. Perhaps he could help him sort out this complicated case. With this thought in mind, William finally fell asleep, preparing for a new day of fighting for the truth. The morning started early for William, as usual. At 6 o'clock, he was already sitting at the kitchen table, looking through the photographs of the documents he had managed to take in the archive. With a cup of coffee in hand, he tried to decipher intricate financial transactions that seemed to make no sense from a legitimate business perspective. At 7:30, William dialed the number of his old friend Michael Donovan, a former police detective. "Mike, it's William. I need your help," he said when his friend answered. "Will? Haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on?" Michael's voice sounded concerned. "It's a long story. Can we get together tonight? Say, at 11 o'clock at the Blue Whale?" "Sure, I'll be there." William hung up the phone and took a deep breath. He knew that bringing Michael in could be risky, but he needed professional help. At work, William tried to carry on as usual. He attended meetings, reviewed reports, and socialized with colleagues. But all the time, he felt scrutiny, especially from Robert Clark, who seemed to be watching his every move. After lunch, William met George in the cafeteria. "Anything new?" George asked quietly as they sat down at a remote table. William nodded. "Maybe. I'm meeting a former detective tonight. I'm hoping he can help me sort through these documents." "Be careful, Will. I'm afraid Robert is suspicious," William agreed. He, too, felt the ring around him tightening. At 1940, William left the office and headed for the Blue Whale, a small bar on the outskirts of town. He chose this place because of its distance from the center, hoping to avoid unwanted attention. Michael was already waiting for him at a table in the corner. They shook hands. "You look good for someone who recently came back from the dead," Michael joked. William smiled weakly. If you only knew Mike. For the next 2 hours, William told his friend the whole story about his disappearance, his amnesia, his return to the company, and his suspicions of corruption. Michael listened intently, asking clarifying questions from time to time. "This is a serious matter, Will," he finally said. "Do you realize that you're not only risking your career, but your life?" William nodded. "I know, but I can't just sit back and do nothing. Someone tried to take me out, and I want to know who and why." Michael rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Okay, I'll help you. But we need to be very careful. Show me those documents you took pictures of." William handed him his phone. Michael studied the photos carefully, making notes from time to time. "There are some interesting things here," he finally said. "These transactions, they look like a classic money laundering scheme, but we need more information to be sure." "How do we get it?" William asked. "I have a few contacts in the financial police. I can ask them carefully without naming names, and you keep digging into the company. But be very careful, Will. If your suspicions are correct, these people will stop at nothing." They had a plan of action for the next few days. William was to continue his search for the company, but now in a more targeted manner, knowing exactly what to look for. Michael, on the other hand, was to use his connections to get more information. Returning home, William felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. On the one hand, he finally felt that he was moving in the right direction. On the other hand, he realized that the danger was becoming more real. At home, Elizabeth was waiting for him. She immediately noticed the tension on his face. "What's wrong, Will?" she asked, concerned. William hesitated. He didn't want to drag his wife into this dangerous situation, but he also knew he couldn't lie to her. "Liz," he began cautiously, "I think I've found something serious at the company. Something illegal." Elizabeth turned pale. "Oh my God, Will, what are you going to do? I have to get to the bottom of this, Liz. For our sake, for Emily's sake, for the sake of everyone who might have been hurt by this corruption." Elizabeth came over and hugged him tightly. "I'm with you no matter what happens, but promise me to be careful." William nodded, feeling his resolve only strengthened by his wife's support. The next few days passed in a blur. William continued his normal work at the company, but he devoted every free minute to finding the evidence. He carefully studied every document, every transaction, looking for any inconsistencies. On Thursday evening, William met with Michael again. This time they chose a park to walk in to avoid the possibility of being overheard. "I found something," Michael said quietly as they walked down a deserted alley. "My contacts in the financial police confirmed that they've been following Harrison Investments for some time, but they lack concrete evidence to open a case." William felt his heart speed up. "What about my disappearance?" Michael shook his head. "It's more complicated than that. Officially, the case was closed when you returned. But," he paused, "there is something strange. The detective who was in charge of your case suddenly resigned right after you returned, and now he's nowhere to be found." William felt a chill run down his spine. "I think it's all connected," Michael nodded. "And I think we're digging into something very serious, Will. Maybe even bigger than just corporate corruption." They continued walking, discussing the next steps. Michael advised William to be extra careful for the next few days and to continue to gather evidence. On the way home, William felt like he was getting closer to a solution, but he also realized that with every step toward the truth, the danger was growing. He knew he had to act quickly, but carefully. Not only his life was at stake, but also the safety of his family and the future of the company. Going to bed that night, William hugged Elizabeth tightly. He vowed to himself that he would find the truth, no matter what it took. But he also promised that he would do everything he could to protect his family from the danger that seemed to be drawing closer with each passing day. Monday began as usual for William, with an early rise and coffee while reviewing financial reports. But this morning he felt particularly tense. Over the past week, he had managed to gather enough evidence that he believed could expose the entire corruption scheme at Harrison Investments. William entered the company's building, trying to look calm. He met Robert Clark in the elevator. "Good morning, William." Robert greeted him with a tight smile. "I'm fine, thank you," William replied, trying not to let his excitement show. In his office, William immediately called George. "Is everything ready?" he asked quietly. "Yes," George replied. "I've contacted the financial police. They will be here at 11 o'clock." William took a deep breath. "Good. Let's go as planned." William spent the next 2 hours preparing all the documents and evidence he could gather. He left his office and headed to the conference room where the emergency management meeting he had called was to take place. When William entered the room, all the key figures in the company, including Robert Clark, were already there. William could feel the intense stares. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I have some important information I want to share with you." Suddenly the door opened and several men in suits entered the room. "What does this mean?" Robert asked sharply, standing up. "It means the game is up, Mr. Clark," one of the men replied, showing a financial police badge. "We have a warrant to search and arrest several individuals in connection with suspected large-scale fraud and money laundering." The room went into chaos. Robert Clark and several other executives tried to escape, but were quickly apprehended. William stood watching the scene, feeling a mixture of relief and shock. The next few hours passed in a blur. William testified, showing the evidence he had collected. He learned that his disappearance was the result of an attempt by Robert Clark and his associates to get rid of him when he accidentally stumbled upon evidence of their illegal activities. In the evening, when the last police officers finally left the company building, William sat in his office feeling incredibly tired. George came up to him. "You did it, Will," he said, putting his hand on his friend's shoulder. "You uncovered the truth." William smiled weakly. "We did it, George. I couldn't have done it without you." When William returned home, he found Elizabeth and Emily waiting for him. The news of the arrests at Harrison Investments had already hit the press. "Daddy!" Emily exclaimed, throwing her arms around his neck. "You're a hero!" William hugged his daughter tightly, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. Elizabeth came over and hugged them both. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. The following weeks were eventful. William spent a lot of time testifying and assisting the investigation. Harrison Investments was at the center of a scandal, but thanks to William's quick actions and the support of honest employees, the company was saved from total collapse. The board of directors unanimously appointed William as the new CEO. He accepted, realizing that he now had a chance to rebuild the company with integrity and transparency. One evening, a month after the arrests, William was sitting on the terrace of his home, watching the sunset. Elizabeth came over and sat down next to him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently. William took a deep breath. "About everything that happened. About how close I was to losing it all, and how much work I have to do." Elizabeth took his hand. "You'll get through this. You're strong, Will, and you're not alone." William smiled and kissed his wife. "I know, and I'm grateful for that every day." At that moment, Emily ran out onto the terrace. "Dad, Mom, look! I drew our family." She handed them the drawing, which depicted 3 people holding hands, with the bright sun shining over them. William felt his heart fill with warmth. He realized that despite all the trials he had gone through, he had found much more than just the truth. He had found true happiness. The next day, as he walked into the Harrison Investments building, William felt a new determination. He knew that there was a lot of work ahead of him, restoring the company's reputation, implementing new ethical standards, and regaining the trust of clients and partners. But he was ready for these challenges. In his office, William stopped at the window, looking out at the city below. He thought about his life before he lost his memory, about the months he spent on the streets, about his fight for the truth. Each of these stages had made him who he was now. William realized that his amnesia, which at first seemed like a curse, actually gave him a unique opportunity to see his life and his business from a different perspective. And now he had a chance to use this experience to create something better. He sat down at his desk and started writing. It was a new code of ethics for Harrison Investments, a set of principles that would ensure that the company would never stray from the path of honesty and transparency. William knew there were still many challenges ahead, but he also knew that with the support of his family, friends, and honest colleagues, he could overcome any obstacle. And most importantly, he finally felt that he had found his place in the world, his true purpose. When he finished writing, William looked out the window once again. The sun was shining brightly, as if promising a new beginning, and William was ready to meet this new future with an open heart and a clear conscience.